Okay, settle in, dim the lights if you like, get comfortable. We're about to embark on a journey, not a relaxing one, I assure you. This is a journey into the past, specifically onto a Viking Longship, and we're going to explore in rather granular detail why, if you were somehow transported back in time to join the crew, you likely wouldn't last a single day. This channel is all about diving deep into the realities of history, stripping away the myths and romance to understand what it really felt like to live in a different time. And few images are more romanticized than the sleek, dragon-prowed longship, cutting through the waves under a square sail, carrying fierce warriors to adventure. It looks powerful, free, even glorious. But the reality was cold, wet, cramped, smelly, and relentlessly uncomfortable. It was a life defined by back-breaking labor, constant exposure to the elements, perpetual hunger, and a terrifying lack of control over your own destiny. So, let's take a long, slow, immersive look at what life was truly like aboard one of these iconic vessels. We'll go segment by segment, exploring different facets of the experience. Don't worry about falling asleep. This is designed to be listened to calmly, maybe even drift off to the sound of waves and creaking timbers, though the historical reality might give you nightmares. Let's begin. Forget the images from movies. The Longship, the Langskip, or Draki. Dragonship in Norse was a marvel of engineering for its time, yes. But it was built for speed, agility, and carrying capacity, not for comfort. Imagine standing on the shore looking at one. It's elegant, low in the water, symmetrical with its curved ends. Often built primarily of oak, sometimes pine, the planks are clinker-built, meaning they overlap like roof tiles and are fastened with iron rivets, the heads often visible in neat rows. This technique created a flexible hull, able to twist and flex with the waves rather than breaking against them. But step closer, smell the tar. Liters and liters of pine tar smeared over every surface to waterproof the wood and the ropes. It's a strong, acrid smell that permeates everything on board. Feel the wood grain under your hand. It's rough, splintery in places. Look at the scale. Even the largest longships, like the one found at Roskilde 2, reconstructed, as the Sea Stallion, were only around 30 meters long. On that, perhaps 60-70 rowers, plus a captain and maybe a few others. That's 70-80 people crammed onto a relatively narrow, open vessel. This wasn't like a modern boat with enclosed cabins, engine rooms, or even much of a deck above the waterline. The central part of the ship, between the high curving prow and stern, was largely open. There might be a central mast, stepped into, a massive oak block called the curling, old woman, and along the sides, rowing benches or positions. There were variations. The carve, shorter and broader, good for coastal waters. The nar, a dedicated merchant vessel, broader still and deeper drafted, relying more on sail for cargo capacity, not speed. But for raiding, exploring, and warfare, the long, lean, open Langskip was king. And this open nature is the first strike against your modern sensibilities. There is virtually no shelter. You are exposed, utterly, to the sky and the sea. Sun, wind, rain, snow, sea spray. You feel it all directly. The lack of an internal frame in the same way a modern ship has ribs was part of its flexible strength, but it also meant the inside of the hull was just the curved planks. No floorboards necessarily covering the bottom, just the bilge area where water collected. So, the ship itself, beautiful from a distance, a marvel of its age, but fundamentally a simple, open wooden shell designed to transport as many people as possible as quickly as possible across often brutal seas. It was a platform for action, not a place of rest or comfort. And understanding this is the first step to understanding why you wouldn't last a day. You're signing up for relentless exposure. Okay, you've somehow found yourself needing or wanting to join a Viking expedition. Maybe you owe money, maybe you're seeking fame and fortune, maybe you're just desperate. Regardless, you're not the Jarl, the chieftain, or captain. You're not one of his inner circle, the experienced, seasoned warriors who likely have specific roles and better positions. No, you're a common hand. You're one of the Drengir, young men, warriors, or simply part of the general crew pool. What does this mean for you? It means you're low on the totem pole. Your position, your survival, depends entirely on your ability to contribute physical labor, follow orders instantly, and not complain too much. Your main job, when the wind isn't fair or is non-existent, is rowing. Row, row, row. For hours on end. The rowing positions weren't like comfy benches. Often you'd sit on a sea chest, if you were lucky enough to have one, or just a piece of wood spanning the hull. Your space is limited to the width of your body and the sweep of your oar. When the wind is fair and the single square sail is hoisted, you become part of the crew responsible for handling it. This isn't like pulling a modern rope on a pulley. These ropes are thick, coarse, tar-soaked hemp or animal hide. Hauling the sail up, adjusting sheets, bracing the yard, it's heavy, physically demanding work. And if the weather changes suddenly, you need to react instantly, often in a chaotic rush. Beyond rowing and sailing, you are general labor, bailing out the bilge water that constantly collects at the bottom of the hull, a foul mix of seawater, rain, refuse, and perhaps vomit. This isn't a job you do once a day, it's whenever enough water sloshes in or rains down. You might use a wooden scoop or a leather bucket. You'll be tasked with maintaining the ship and gear, inspecting ropes for wear, patching small holes, cleaning up messes, helping with repairs underway. Your hands will be perpetually raw, scraped and sore from the rough wood, the coarse ropes, and the constant wet. There's no specialized role for you beyond general hard labor. You aren't the navigator, the sailmaker, or the shipwright, unless you were one before joining, but even then, you'd likely still row and bail. You are muscle, grunt, and warm body, contributing to the collective effort. Your life is immediately reduced to a cycle of physical exhaustion and the desperate search for minimal comfort. This lack of agency, this constant demand for physical output in appalling conditions, would be the first major shock. Your body would scream in protest within hours. Imagine the scene at the fjord or harbor mouth. The longship is loaded. Men, maybe a few women, though less common on raiding voyages, provisions, weapons, gear. There's a buzz of anticipation, maybe some fear, certainly noise. The smells are potent: salt water, tar, sweat, cooking fires from nearby camps, animal hides. You've said goodbye, perhaps to family, perhaps just to the hard ground you slept on. There's no turning back now. The Jarl gives the order. The men push the ship away from shore or raise the stone anchor, a heavy rock tied to a rope. If the wind is favorable, the mast is stepped, if it wasn't already, into the curling, a massive undertaking involving dozens of men, and the sail is hoisted with chanting and effort. The ship starts to move, picking up speed as the wind fills the sail. The wooden oar ports along the sides are closed up with wooden covers to prevent waves from sloshing in when sailing. If there's no wind, or they need to navigate a narrow channel or get out to open water, the order comes to row. The oar port covers are opened, the oars are shipped, put into the water. The captain or a trusted man sets a rhythm, often with a drum or simply a shouted cadence. Hup, 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 and you start to pull. Feel the weight of the oar, the resistance of the water. Hear the rhythmic creak of wood against wood, the splash of the oar blades entering and leaving the water, the collective grunts and breaths of the crew. The ship begins to move forward, powered by raw human muscle. As the land recedes, the world changes. The familiar smells and sounds of shore fade. Now it's just the ship, the sea, and the sky. There's a finality to it. You are committed. For weeks, maybe months, this small, open boat is your entire world. Everything you need to survive must be on board or acquired along the way. The sheer psychological weight of this isolation, this dependence on a flimsy wooden shell in a vast, indifferent ocean, would be a profound change from anything you've ever experienced. Modern life allows easy retreat, communication, escape. A longship voyage offered none of that. You are adrift, in every sense of the word. Let's get right to the most persistent, soul-crushing reality of life on a longship. You are always cold and always wet. There is no enclosed cabin, no heated space. Your clothing, typically wool or linen tunics, trousers, and a wool cloak, offers some insulation but gets soaked through easily by rain or sea spray. And once it's wet, it stays wet. Where do you dry it? There's no fire on board while at sea. Far too dangerous. Maybe if the sun comes out and it's warm, you can spread things on the ropes or edge of the ship, hoping a wave doesn't wash them away. But often, your clothes simply become a second skin of damp, cold misery. Sea spray is a constant. Even in moderate waves, water is coming over the low sides. In rougher seas, waves crash over the ship, filling the open hull. This is why bailing is such a critical, endless task. The water collects, making the bottom of the ship a cold, sloshing pool. Your feet and legs are frequently submerged in this icy, foul liquid. The deck itself, if you can call the open hull a deck, is cold and hard. Sleeping directly on it means the cold seeps into your bones. Your only protection is a wool blanket, maybe a sleeping bag made of animal skins or more, wool felt, and perhaps a makeshift tent or tilt rigged over part of the ship using spars and sailcloth or hides. This offers some respite from direct rain or spray, but it's drafty, damp, and provides minimal warmth. Imagine trying to sleep when you're shivering uncontrollably. Your muscles ache from the cold. Your skin is clammy. Every movement just reminds you of how utterly miserable you are. Your joints stiffen. Your fingers and toes feel perpetually numb. This isn't just discomfort, it's physically debilitating. Prolonged exposure to cold and wet leads to hypothermia, frostbite, even in surprisingly mild temperatures combined with wind and wet, and makes you far more susceptible to illness. Your body is constantly expending energy just trying to stay warm. This saps your strength, your morale, and your ability to perform the strenuous tasks required of you. A day of this, a single 24-hour cycle of being cold, damp, and exposed, with no prospect of drying out or warming up, would be physically and mentally exhausting beyond belief for someone accustomed to modern heating and dry clothing. You'd be shaking, teeth chattering, miserable, and probably on the verge of giving up entirely. Okay, let's talk about food. Viking ships needed provisions for weeks or months at sea. What did they bring? And more importantly, what was it like to eat? Fresh food was a luxury that spoiled quickly, so the staple diet consisted primarily of preserved foods. Dried fish was absolutely fundamental. Cod, herring, or other catches split and air-dried until they were practically bone-hard. This stockfish, as it was known in later trade, could last for months, even years, if kept dry. But eating it? It wasn't exactly gourmet. You'd often need to soak it to make it remotely chewable, or boil it into a watery stew. Chew on a piece of bone-dry fish and imagine the texture, the intense, fishy smell, the effort required to break it down with your teeth. Nutritional, yes. Appetizing, rarely. Then there was dried meat or smoked meat, perhaps pemmican-like preparations of pounded dried meat mixed with fat and berries, though this is less certain for Vikings, more associated with later indigenous practices. Again, hard, chewy, often, incredibly salty. Salt was a preservative. Grains like barley or oats were brought often in the form of hardtack. unleavened bread baked until rock hard. Think of a ship's biscuit, but perhaps even more primitive. You'd often need to dunk this in liquid to eat it without breaking your teeth. It was bland, monotonous, and prone to weevils on long voyages. Dairy products that kept well were also important: butter and skyr, a thick yogurt-like cultured dairy product. These provided fat and protein, essential for energy, but added to the limited range of flavors. Vegetables and fruits, practically non-existent on a long voyage unless you made a stop. Maybe some dried berries or foraged greens if you were near land. This meant a severe lack of vitamins, especially vitamin C, making scurvy a real risk on longer expeditions. Cooking, as mentioned, wasn't possible while sailing. Food was usually eaten cold or rehydrated with cold water. Meals were monotonous. The same dried fish, the same hardtack, day after day after day. And the water situation. Fresh water barrels were essential but finite. Water could go stale, develop algae, and taste foul. To avoid this, or simply because they preferred it, Vikings often drank ale or mead instead of water. The alcohol content, likely low, helped preserve it. But imagine being constantly slightly dehydrated or relying on weak alcoholic drinks for hydration while performing intense physical labor in the cold and wet. This isn't the scene of hearty feasting and endless tankards of ale you might imagine. It's survival drinking. You would be perpetually hungry, or at least unsatisfied. Your meals would be meager, cold, bland, and require significant effort to consume. Your body would crave fresh food, variety, warmth, the sheer psychological toll of this constant dietary deprivation and monotony, combined with the physical demands, would be immense. Your stomach would churn, your energy levels would plummet, and the simple act of eating would become a chore, not a pleasure. Where do you sleep on an open longship? Nowhere comfortable, that's for sure. There are no cabins, no bunks. You sleep wherever you can find a spot in the open hull, perhaps between rowing benches or alongside the central support structure for the mast. If you're lucky, you might have a personal sea chest that can serve as a makeshift seat or pillow, but many would simply have a bag with their meager possessions. Your bed is the hard, often damp, wooden hull planking. Your mattress is your blanket, or sleeping bag, likely made of wool or animal hides. These materials are warm when dry, but heavy and miserable when wet, which, as we've established, is most of the time. You try to find a spot that's relatively sheltered, maybe under the rigged tilt if there is one. But space is tight. You're sleeping shoulder to shoulder with your shipmates. Privacy is non-existent. You hear every snore, every cough, every shift in position. You smell everyone's unwashed bodies, their damp clothes, the ever-present scent of tar and stale bilge water. The ship is constantly moving. Even in calm seas, there's a gentle roll and pitch. In rougher weather, it's violent. You're being tossed around. Try to sleep when the floor beneath you is lurching and waves are crashing nearby. And it's cold. The cold seeps up from the damp wood. The wind whips through the open space. You huddle with your blanket or sleeping bag, trying to conserve warmth. You might try to sleep in your wet clothes because taking them off in the cold, damp air seems unbearable. Sleep is fitful, interrupted by the ship's movement, the noise, the cold, the discomfort, and probably the need to take a turn bailing or keeping watch. Deep, restful sleep is a rarity. You are perpetually sleep-deprived. This lack of proper rest exacerbates all the other hardships. Your physical strength is diminished, your mental faculties dulled, your mood soured. The simple, human need for a safe, warm, dry place to rest and recover is completely unmet for weeks on end. You would quickly realize that sleep is not a time for recuperation, but simply a slightly less awful state than being awake and working. The constant exhaustion would break you down swiftly. We touched on rowing, but let's really lean into the sheer physical grind it represented. Longships were built for speed, and while they had a sail, They were also designed to be rowed by large crews. This provided speed regardless of wind direction and the ability to maneuver quickly in battle or coastal waters. Imagine your position at an oar. You're sitting on a narrow support, knees may be up near your chest depending on the design. The oar itself is a heavy piece of wood, meters long. The sheer leverage requires significant force. You grip the thick, often chafing handle. The call comes to row. You dip the blade into the water, pull back with all your might, swinging your body, pushing with your legs, if you have a foot brace, using your back and arms. Then feather the blade, turn it flat, to slice through the air on the recovery, and push it forward again. Repeat, repeat, repeat. There is a rhythm, yes, dictated by the stroke master or captain, but maintaining that rhythm, that powerful pull, for hours on end is grueling. Your muscles burn. Back, shoulders, arms, legs. Your hands develop blisters that burst and bleed, only to be covered in salt water, stinging intensely. The repetitive motion is monotonous, but the physical effort is punishing. You sweat despite the cold. You breathe hard. Your heart pounds. And unlike a modern rowing machine where you can stop, you can't. The ship needs to move. If you falter, you mess up the rhythm for the men around you, potentially earning a shout or worse from the captain or your neighbors. This isn't a short sprint. Rowing shifts could last for hours, broken only by brief rests before starting again. Imagine rowing for 4, 6, 8 hours in a day, possibly even longer if needed, with only hardtack and stale water to fuel you. The cumulative fatigue is immense. Your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. Muscles seize up. Joints throb. This constant, intense physical exertion in a state of cold, damp, poor nutrition and sleep deprivation is a recipe for collapse. Your modern body, used to climate control, ergonomic chairs, and readily available calories, would simply not be able to sustain this level of effort for long. You would be physically broken within hours of your first serious rowing shift. But it wasn't just rowing. As a general hand, your physical labor was constant. When sailing, you were wrestling with ropes and the heavy sail. The ropes, made of hemp or animal hides, were thick and stiff, especially when wet and coated in tar. Pulling them tight, adjusting them, hauling the sail up or down, it required significant strength and coordination. Imagine trying to handle a thick, wet rope in icy conditions with raw, blistered hands. Bailing, as mentioned, was a frequent necessity. Stooping, scooping or bucketing out the foul water and heaving it over the side. Again, repetitive, wet, cold work that never seemed to end. Maintaining the ship's gear was ongoing. Ropes fray, wood splits, sail tears. Repairing these things underway, often with primitive tools and materials, was part of the job. Maybe you're stitching a tear in the sail with a thick needle and coarse thread, hands numb with cold. Maybe you're hammering in a loose rivet, perched precariously on a slippery, pitching deck. Loading and unloading the ship at stops was another burst of intense labor. Carrying heavy chests, provisions, maybe even cargo acquired through trade or, more likely, raid. Even basic tasks like moving around the ship were physically demanding. The deck is uneven, often slippery. There are ropes and obstacles everywhere. Maintaining balance on a constantly moving platform, especially in rough weather, requires core strength and agility. You were constantly on your feet or engaged in some form of strenuous activity during daylight hours and often into the night, for watches or emergencies. There was no downtime in the modern sense. Rest was brief, uncomfortable, and barely sufficient to recover before the next demand on your body. Your physical resilience would be tested to its absolute limit, constantly. The combination of endless labor, exposure, lack of sleep, and poor nutrition would create a state of chronic exhaustion and physical breakdown that your body would simply not be equipped to handle for more than a very short period. You'd be injury-prone, constantly sore, and utterly drained. Let's talk about hygiene, or rather, the almost complete lack thereof on a long sea voyage. There was no fresh water for washing. At best, you might rinse your hands or face in seawater, which leaves you feeling sticky and coated in salt. Baths were something you did on land, a luxury probably enjoyed infrequently even there. On the ship, you simply accumulated dirt, sweat, salt, tar, and grime. Latrine facilities? Non-existent. People relieved themselves over the side of the ship, a precarious maneuver in rough seas. The bilge collected not just water, but also refuse and waste that inevitably didn't make it cleanly over the side. The smell was horrendous. A sickening mix of damp wood, tar, stale air, unwashed bodies, and waste. Lice and other parasites were a constant problem. Living in such close quarters, sleeping huddled together, wearing the same clothes for weeks, it was a breeding ground for infestations. Imagine the persistent itching, the irritation, adding another layer of misery to your existence. And all of this created a fertile environment for sickness. Living in cold, damp, unsanitary conditions, with poor nutrition and sleep deprivation, your immune system would be severely compromised. Common illnesses like colds and coughs would sweep through the crew. But more serious dangers lurked. Dysentery, caused by contaminated water or food, could spread like wildfire through the ship, leading to dehydration and death. Infections from minor cuts and scrapes, easily acquired from rough work, could turn serious quickly without antiseptic or antibiotics. Sea boils, painful skin infections caused by salt and friction, were common. There was no doctor on board. Medical knowledge was basic, a mix of practical experience, herbal remedies, if you had any and could use them, and superstition. Serious injuries like a broken bone in a storm or a deep cut from an axe during a raid were often death sentences. There was no emergency evacuation, no hospital waiting at the next port. You survived or you died, often in agony. Imagine being terribly sick or injured on this cold, hard, moving platform, surrounded by the smells and sounds of suffering with no relief in sight. The fear of falling ill or getting injured, knowing the likely outcome, would be a constant, chilling presence. Your modern expectation of relatively clean conditions and available medical care would be brutally unmet. A bad cut, a persistent fever, a bout of severe diarrhea, any one of these could be enough to end your journey permanently within that first day or two of serious symptoms appearing. Beyond the physical hardships, the psychological toll of a longship voyage was immense. There were long stretches of mind-numbing boredom. Days or even weeks could pass with fair winds, requiring little more than keeping watch and adjusting the sail occasionally. Or, conversely, days becalmed, drifting listlessly, the crew reduced to frustrated inactivity. What do you do to pass the time? There were no books, literacy was rare, no electronic devices, no varied entertainment. You talked, you told sagas and stories, you perhaps played simple board games like Hnefatafl if someone had a set. Some might whittle or do simple repairs, but monotony was a constant threat to morale. This boredom could quickly morph into tension and conflict in such cramped quarters. Small annoyances become major issues. Personalities clash. Arguments could escalate, sometimes violently, in a society that valued honor and quick tempers. The captain had to maintain discipline, sometimes brutally. Living cheek to jowl with the same group of people day after day, with no personal space, would be incredibly stressful. But the boredom could be shattered instantly by sheer terror. The sudden onset of a storm, the sight of a potential enemy, ship on the horizon, navigating treacherous, unfamiliar coastlines, the fear of capsizing, of being dashed against rocks, of drowning in the freezing water, of being attacked and killed. This wasn't abstract fear, it was immediate, visceral, and ever-present. Adding to this was the fear of the unknown and the power of superstition. These were people deeply connected to their beliefs in Norse gods, spirits, and omens. The sea itself was a powerful, capricious entity, ruled by gods like Njord or Aegir and inhabited by mythical creatures. Every creak of the ship, every strange cloud formation, every unusual bird could be interpreted as a sign. Appeasing the gods with sacrifices, wearing protective amulets, performing rituals before setting sail, these were serious matters. Imagine the psychological weight of believing that your survival depends not just on skill and strength, but also on the whims of powerful, invisible forces. Seeing a bad omen, hearing a creak that sounds like a death groan in the hull, feeling the icy grip of a wave and wondering if a sea monster's pulling you down. This blend of rational fear and deeply ingrained superstition created a mental landscape that was constantly on edge. Your modern mind, accustomed to scientific explanations and a sense of control, or at least predictable risks, would struggle with this. The lack of control, the raw fear, the oppressive boredom, and the weight of superstitious beliefs would be a crushing burden on your mental well-being. You weren't alone in this misery, but your companions weren't necessarily there. To make things easier, the crew was a mix of people bound together by the venture. At the top was the Jarl or captain, the owner of the ship or the leader of the expedition. His word was law. His experience and decisions dictated the fate of everyone aboard. His closest followers, often experienced warriors, and his personal retinue formed a sort of inner circle, likely getting slightly better treatment or positions. Below them was the general crew, the mass of rowers and laborers. Social distinctions didn't vanish at sea, but everyone had to pull their weight. Those who didn't or who challenged authority could face harsh punishment, even being thrown overboard, a terrifying thought when miles from land. Camaraderie certainly existed. Facing shared danger and hardship forged bonds. You relied on the man next to you at the oar, or the one helping you wrestle the sail in a storm. Stories were shared, songs might be sung, though perhaps more functional. Work songs than leisure. There was a sense of being in it together, for good or ill. But human nature in a confined, stressful environment is complex. Resentment could fester. Envy over meager possessions or perceived slights. Arguments over space, food, or duties. The Jarl had to manage these tensions, keeping the crew unified enough to function. Physical altercations weren't uncommon. A society that valued martial prowess and honor settled disputes with fists, knives, or whatever was at hand, even in the cramped confines of the ship. Imagine trying to avoid conflict when you literally cannot get away from the people who annoy or threaten you. The dynamics were raw and immediate. There was no HR department, no formal justice system beyond the captain's ruling. You had to navigate this volatile social environment while simultaneously dealing with the physical and environmental challenges. Understanding who you could trust, who to avoid, and how to survive the internal politics of the ship was as crucial as being able to row or handle a rope. For someone used to personal space, privacy, and relatively polite social interactions, being crammed into this intensely personal, potentially volatile mix of people, with no escape, would be incredibly difficult to manage. The social discomfort and potential for conflict add yet another layer to the question of whether you'd last the day. Let's paint a picture of perhaps the most immediate, terrifying danger on a long ship: a storm. The weather changes quickly at sea. One moment the sun is out, the next the sky darkens, the wind whips up, and the waves begin to build. On an open, long ship, there is no running inside. The captain makes the call. Either try to ride it out under a small storm sail, if the wind is favorable but strong, or, more likely, take down the sail entirely, maybe lower the mast if possible. A huge, dangerous task in building seas, and just try to keep the ship pointed into the waves, potentially using oars just for stability. Feel the ship begin to heave and pitch violently. Hear the wind howl through the rigging, a high-pitched shriek that sounds like a hungry beast. Hear the thunder crack overhead. See the lightning illuminate the monstrous waves rising around you. Water is no longer just spraying over the sides, it's coming in. Sheets of rain lash down, chilling you instantly. Waves crash over the bow, flooding the open hull. The cry goes up, "Bail! Bail!" You grab a scoop or bucket and start frantically, trying to empty the ship, but the water is coming in faster than you can get it out. The ship groans and protests around you. You hear the timbers flexing, creaking under the strain. Is it going to break? You don't know. You can feel the hull twisting beneath your feet. You're desperately trying to hold on to something. A rope, a bench, the side of the ship, to avoid being thrown across the hull. Your hands are slick with water, cold and numb. The cold water is everywhere, filling your boots, soaking your clothes, sloshing around your legs. Fear, pure primal fear, grips you. You see the faces of your shipmates, some grimly determined, some pale with terror. The noise is deafening. Wind, waves, shouting, the ship's tormented sounds. This isn't a modern boat that can send out a distress signal or retreat to a sheltered harbor easily. You are at the mercy of the elements. Your life depends entirely on the strength of the ship, the skill of the captain, and sheer luck. The belief in gods might be strong here. Desperate prayers might be offered over the roar of the storm. A severe storm could last for hours, even days. The physical exhaustion from clinging on, bailing, and battling the elements is immense. The mental trauma of facing potential death with every crashing wave is profound. Surviving a major storm was a testament to the resilience of the ships and their crews, but many did not. The sheer terror and physical punishment of just an hour or two in a serious gale would be enough to make you understand the immense fragility of life on a longship. After days or weeks at sea, the sight of land would be the most welcome thing imaginable. The dark line on the horizon, slowly resolving into cliffs, trees, or sandy beaches. The smell of earth and vegetation carried on the wind, replacing the endless scent of salt and tar. But reaching land didn't necessarily mean rest and safety. For a Viking longship, landfall could mean several things: a planned stop for trade, pulling into a market town or a kaupang, trading settlement. Here there might be temporary relief, the chance to resupply, trade goods, maybe even find some. Temporary, slightly more comfortable lodging and fresh food. But these were often bustling, potentially dangerous places themselves, full of strangers and rivals. A stop for repair or shelter, seeking refuge from weather, patching the ship, finding fresh water from a stream. This meant more hard work on shore, beaching the ship, a massive undertaking, making repairs with limited resources and still sleeping rough just on solid ground instead of a moving deck. Or, most famously, landfall meant raiding. This is where the longship earned its terrifying reputation, pulling into an unsuspecting bay, rowing silently towards a monastery, a village, or a farmstead. The transition from the arduous life at sea to brutal, violent action could be incredibly swift. Imagine the shift in atmosphere. The relief at seeing land is replaced by tension and adrenaline. Weapons are checked. Orders are given in hushed tones. The oars dip silently. The dragon head on the prow, perhaps previously covered, is revealed, a symbol of terror. As a common hand, you're likely part of the landing force. Jumping into the cold shallows, scrambling ashore, weapon in hand. The sights, sounds, and smells change again. Screams, smoke, the smell of burning thatch, the coppery scent of blood. This wasn't glorious battle in the modern sense. It was often quick, brutal, and focused on acquiring loot and captives. The psychological shift from enduring passive suffering at sea to actively inflicting violence and terror on land would be jarring, to say the least. And the dangers on land were different but just as real. Resistance, injury, death in combat, or being left behind if the ship had to leave quickly. So, while land offered a break from the sea hardships, it introduced new, intense dangers and demands. The moments ashore were often brief and focused on achieving the expedition's goals before returning to the relative safety, or at least known misery, of the open sea. The lack of a true safe haven, a place to fully recover and relax even on land, reinforces the relentless nature of the longship life. If the expedition was successful, whether in trade, raid, or exploration, the longship would eventually turn back towards home. This return journey wasn't necessarily easier than the outward-bound trip. Supplies would be dwindling. If they had acquired cargo, the ship might be heavier, sitting lower in the water, making it slower and more vulnerable to waves. The crew would be months older, fatigued from the voyage and whatever activities they engaged in ashore. Injuries might need tending, sickness might still linger or emerge. The weather might have changed with the seasons. Navigating back across open water, relying on the same basic methods, sun, stars, luck, carried all the same risks as the journey out. Storms could still strike. Opposing winds could force long, grueling periods of rowing. Psychologically, the journey might feel different. Now you were heading towards home, with the hope of seeing loved ones again, of spending whatever meager share of the profits you might receive. This hope could fuel endurance, but it could also make the hardships and delays even more frustrating. The destination was known and desired, making the intervening miles of misery harder to bear. Accidents were still a constant threat. A rope snapping, someone being washed overboard, an oar handle breaking at a critical moment. Vigilance was still required. The crew dynamics might have changed. Success could lead to celebration and good spirits, but failure or heavy losses ashore could breed resentment and despair. Disputes over the division of loot could turn violent. The journey home was, in essence, a repetition of the outward voyage's challenges, layered with accumulated fatigue and the weight of expectations or disappointments from the time ashore. It was one final, prolonged test of endurance before the relative comfort of land was finally reached, and failing this test meant perishing just miles from home. Over weeks and months, the longship ceased to be just a vessel. It became the crew's entire world, a microcosm of Viking society, albeit stripped down to its bare essentials. It was a world bounded by the wooden hull and the vast, indifferent sea and sky. Every resource, every human interaction, every challenge was contained within this small, moving space. It was, in a sense, a home. It carried you, protected you, mostly from the elements and the waves, brought you towards goals. Bonds were formed, routines established, a sense of shared experience developed. It was the only place where you belonged during the voyage, but it was also a prison. You couldn't leave. You were subject to its constant discomforts, its dangers, its social structure. Your life was dictated by the rhythm of rowing, the demands of the weather, the orders of the captain. There was no personal space, no privacy, no escape from the hardships or the company of your shipmates. This dual nature, the longship as both essential sanctuary and inescapable confinement, shaped the experience profoundly. It was a place of incredible human resilience, where people pushed their physical and mental limits for survival and potential gain. It was also a place of intense suffering, fear, and loss. Understanding the longship isn't just about its construction or voyages. It's about understanding it as a lived environment, a place where people endured unimaginable conditions by modern standards. They adapted, they suffered, they survived, or didn't. The ship was the crucible in which their endurance was tested, and often found wanting from our perspective. So, let's bring it back to our initial premise. Why wouldn't you, a person from the 21st century, last a day on a Viking longship? It's the cumulative effect of everything we've discussed hitting your modern body and mind simultaneously. Within the first few hours of setting sail, especially if rowing, the sheer physical labor would exhaust you. Muscles you didn't know you had would ache and burn. Your hands would start blistering from the rough oar. The constant cold and damp would be a shock to your system. The wind and spray would bite at your skin. Your clothes would become wet and heavy, and you'd feel the chill deep in your bones. Shivering would become uncontrollable. Your first meal of cold, hardtack, and dried fish would be a grim realization of the monotonous, unappetizing diet. The stale water or weak ale would do little to quench your thirst, and your stomach might protest the unfamiliar, rough food. As the day wore on, the lack of hygiene would become apparent. The smells, the grime, the itching from potential parasites already starting to make their presence known. The thought of using the latrine over the side in a pitching sea would be a terrifying prospect. Trying to find a moment's rest or comfort would be impossible. Sitting or lying on the hard, damp deck with the ship moving and noise all around, you'd feel the relentless discomfort. The exhaustion would be overwhelming, but restful sleep unattainable. And all of this would be overlaid with a layer of constant anxiety and potential fear. Fear of the unpredictable weather, fear of encountering enemies, fear of illness or injury, fear of simply not being able to keep up and facing the displeasure of the captain or crew. Your modern expectations of warmth, dryness, comfortable sleep, readily available and palatable food, clean water, personal space, hygiene, and medical attention would be brutally, utterly shattered within that first day. You wouldn't have the physical conditioning, the mental fortitude honed by a lifetime of hardship, or the sheer tolerance for discomfort that these people possessed. You'd be physically broken, shivering uncontrollably, nauseous from the food and the motion, raw-handed from the work, miserable from the lack of sleep and comfort, and terrified by the complete lack of safety net. Your body and mind, conditioned by centuries of increasing comfort and security, would stage a full-scale rebellion. You might not die within 24 hours, though a sudden storm, a serious accident, or a swift onset of dysentery is entirely possible. But you would certainly be non-functional. You'd be a liability, unable to pull your weight, a drain on the meager resources and patience of the crew. And that, in itself, might be a death sentence in such a brutal, practical environment. So, the romantic image of the Viking Longship, while inspiring, hides a harsh, unforgiving reality. It was a vessel of power and reach, yes, but for the average person aboard, it was a floating world of relentless hardship, where simply enduring the day was a profound challenge. And there you have it, a deep dive into the rather uncomfortable reality of life aboard a Viking Longship. It makes you appreciate, doesn't it, the simple luxury of a warm, dry room, a comfortable bed, a hot meal, and clean water on tap. These are things we take for granted every single day, but which would have felt like unimaginable treasures to someone enduring a voyage like this. Thinking about the past in this way, focusing on the sensory and the personal, really helps connect us to the people who lived through it. They weren't mythical figures. They were humans with bodies that felt pain, minds that felt fear and boredom, and spirits that somehow found the resilience to face these challenges day after day. I hope this journey into the past, despite its harshness, has been informative, and perhaps even calming in its steady exploration of detail. Sometimes focusing on the concrete realities of a distant time can quiet the noise of our own. If you enjoyed this exploration, or if it sparked any thoughts or questions, please do let me know in the comments below. What surprised you the most about life on a longship? What modern comfort do you think you'd miss the fastest? If you'd like to see more videos like this, exploring the unromanticized realities of history, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. It truly helps. Thank you for joining me on this voyage. I wish you a peaceful night, and sleep well.